예고전화 진다 투모에 삼바장유 고시되다 독dengi 님이 고르슈에 슈고로와 자당도 돈다 가르스나 안조 레다 녀모 원기 계비 녀모보 녀모보게 레사디니 레요 코와기와 렌신베 계와델야 안 풍부 안저게 코와세 제자다 코와델야 닝보스 가요 말했을 때 코위 견디니스요레스 지난단 레나 녀몽을 깨와 마임바 몰람난 깨와 바실을 주두게 네 풍보텔라 깨와림베 풍보테 다 디어팅이 대화네 대화마도 동안 가야요 말해서 지난단 언절이야 깨와래야들이야 몰람난 깨와 바실에 တင်း주두게 깨와래 루실래야 주요레스 엔디메베게 레다 녀몽봉기 네 라와메 발레다 녀몽 깨와래 깨와래야들 직니여 바래 니여바 인자당 한조 고야라 가르고고세는 한조 띵이 대화 강아 균이 매겐지 고거와 리디 고거 디 리디다 타르베 고바 톱노마도 용고 말에 제산 타르바토고 타르바토바이나 타르바톱세비지를 딘디 리디 근데 균 남제단 제비게다 저기 띵이 동화가에 매되겐지 용고로와 안띵아도 고거래 근데 디 고야라 다등 한조 가와 요라세는 레다 녀모 옹이 깨와 렘비기 풍보들이 내려요래 제사다 레다 녀모 옹이 깨와 렘바디 파 저기 풍보들이 균로시 마상 보이나 데라 탈디게 삼바기고 말에 데라 탈디게 삼바마게나 아니 균다다단 제비기 탈비고 본 퇴비기 아니 풍보디 뭐나 깨와 바실로 주비기 풍보디 아니 주비알이야 먼저 돈이 기고 말와 다디 돈이 기고래 디 돈이 기에제 디 톱고라 디 톱발라 나주 콜비 둥하기 다 레다 녀모 깨발림에 풍보텔라 한 견이 된데 시어레스 견이 하고요도 다디 야보면도 인보면도 선비에 삼나게도 한 딜에 야가 풍보디 토야기 돈이 좀 받기 기고로와 되네 인자 당한 주대 콜비기 둥하기 야고야 쉬야디 김전도 있던데
Good evening. So we are looking at the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. And we are looking at the part of the trainings which are the meditations on true sufferings, in particular meditating on true sufferings by means of the Eightfold Division or the Eightfold Presentation of suffering. So why we are looking at this? Well, we are using this knowledge as a vehicle by which to come to recognize our own situation, the actual reality of our own situation. Something that, whilst it's been the case like this since beginningless time for each of us individually, it has stayed obscure to us. What we're coming to, or striving to recognize, is that through our afflictions, we accumulate karma, and that karma is contaminated, whether virtuous or non-virtuous. That karma is contaminated because of the presence of the afflictions. And then when a contaminated karmic imprint is ripened by the afflictions and propels a rebirth, we once again take rebirth in samsara. So this is the process of circling in cyclic existence, this ongoing cycle where we, through our afflictions, accumulate contaminated karma, which leads to ongoing rebirth in samsara. And through this we come to recognize, so this is the process we're in. Then these meditations guide us to recognize that samsara, because of our samsaric experience being pervaded by the afflictions, there is no abiding value or no essence anywhere within samsara. And again, to emphasize this point, the reason why there's no abiding value or essence in samsara is because of the dominant role of the afflictions. What we also are being I'm repeatedly reminding you of in these meditations is that it does not have to be like this. Rebirth does not have to be taken under the power of, under the control of afflictions and contaminated karma. Arya Bodhisattva, or as well as an Arhat, when they take rebirth, it's under two very different causes. Firstly, pure karma, not contaminated, pure karma and prayer. So there's no role of the afflictions. They've been completely abandoned together with their seeds. So therefore, for such beings, an Arhat or an Arya Bodhisattva, rebirth is taken under the control of their pure karma and prayer. So there are these two distinct routes routes by which one takes rebirth. One is under the control of prayer and pure karma, and the other, the one that we've had experience of since beginningless time, is our afflictions and contaminated karma. So this meditation is part of the meditation of Four Noble Truths, is to get us to recognize this situation that we are in, the actual reality of our situation, and in particular where we are now, looking at true sufferings. This is to lead us to the point where we see that our experience is pervaded by suffering, or pervaded by the possibility of suffering. In other words, there's not even a moment of lasting happiness that can be found, no peace to be found. And this recognition is indispensable so that we can give rise to a determined attitude to emerge from the suffering realms of samsara and strive for liberation. This is the outcome of these meditations. And without doing these meditations in the way that is presented here, and doing so repeatedly over a sustained period, one will not come to recognize our situation, because it is all that we've ever known. We take it as normal. But through these meditations, we come to recognize that all that we perceive is tainted by these afflictions. Hence, we are bound in samsara by them. When one recognizes this and gives rise to a repulsion, a rejection of the situation, a renunciation of the situation, we then can give rise to this determined positive mind to emerge from the suffering realms and gain liberation. So by doing these meditations, such a determined attitude will arise. By not doing them, one will not come to recognize our predicament. One will just take these suffering experiences as normal, and therefore nothing can be done about it. Whereas by these meditations, we recognize freedom is possible. As we move through these, we've looked at 6 of the sufferings. You see how they presented with their 5 points for each. So this is it's presented in this way to aid one in one's analytical meditation. So in the way that I've guided how to meditate, one does so by means of this information presented in a way that's ideally suited to analytical meditation. So where we got to, on page 161, is we concluded with looking at the suffering of meeting with the unpleasant and the suffering of separation from the pleasant. That's as far as we got last time.
총체장 켜보 마된바 소대 강랑 레와데 베네 자야 마녀바 이치베 동아로스.
Reading from the text on page 161, the 7th of the 8 sufferings, the suffering of seeking what you desire and not getting it. The suffering of seeking what you desire and not getting it has 5 points that are similar to those associated with separation from the pleasant. Seeking what you desire but not getting it means not getting what you have been hoping for despite your efforts in seeking it, such as doing farm work but not reaping a harvest, and doing business but not accruing a profit. The last sentence, quite a bit was missed, but the meaning is just really taking the title at the end. So I'll just read the full translation. This is a suffering of disappointment, which comes from working hard to get something that you long for and then not getting it.
Deba Zaya Mani Big Dunga City, Dagajan, the Leda, Numo, Kiwa Lens, how and the Koala Kiwa Lembanza, the Kimzengi, the Korean Telia, Sosugu Deva, Legaro, Karino, Dubue, Deva Chichivene, the Julia, Galekabu, Jumatoba, and the Niki Kangantigo, SSG, that Dundala, Deba Zaya Mani Bidunga said.
The suffering of seeking what you desire, not getting it, has 5 points that are similar to those associated with separation from the pleasant. What this seventh suffering comes down to is that having taken rebirth due to contaminated karma and afflictions, the things that one strives to achieve, one all too often struggles to achieve that and often does not achieve what one is longing for. So one puts effort and energy into achieving something, but is all too often unable to do so.
Dono Madupatang, so the Sosugi, that be Shimbarusina, Sosugi, Tachike, Karichivorsine, but Dondo Yakuya, Dondala, Dondo Tagur, Wada, Dondo Tab, the day Dondo Tabainea, Hajik, Chava Yakumaji, Kingi, Dondo Yakumajova, Tevo de Yakuma Mimba. The name Gabriel Chulo, Kingi, Tevo de Yakumimba, Hajele, Sosugi, Dondo, the Shingdi, Nada, Karina, Tabna, Tevo de Ramia, Raya, Deva Nietzsche. Ligor de Ina Devotelia, Barshi Kingi, Majua de Maniba, Marava, Mambungores, Cesadi, Dinganzu Leda, Numo, Gialim, Koapala, the Nekanga Hungores, but that Trajan Batosan, the Sukanga Mares or Danala, Cezangan Koapala Kanga Carrios and Tang Suzuki, Dondor, which Jevu, Karakoina, the Nigit, Shingligi, Legacy, Leche, Kale Kepchi, Jevu to Viagi, Dondo Yece, Legade, Ligor de Ina and Digi. Tevo Yabu Meva, Majova, Gabriel Tevo, Numato Marawa, Gabriel Tevo Ravan and Tevo di Yogo, and the Neshi Yogo, so the Devana Shinji, Ragu Mares, Di Marawa Dinganzu, Koa Bigi, Koa Legiwa Limba, the Guinness order.
So we see that at this point, the seventh, has 5 points that are similar to the sixth, that's associated with separation from the pleasant. So when one has a strong desire for something but one fails to obtain it, one experiences the same types of suffering as presented above. So there's sorrow in the mind, lamentation in the speech, the body is harmed, and there's the mind becomes tormented and you miss the pleasure of it. So the 5 mentioned above. So similar things happen when, for example, the text continues, seeking what you desire, but not getting it means not getting what you have been hoping for despite your efforts in seeking it, such as doing farm work and not reaping a harvest. So this is a clear illustration that when one farms, one does not get an abundant crop year after year after year. Some years the crop fails. Some years there is a crop to harvest, but it's of poor quality. And this isn't just dependent on one's hard work. One may work equally hard, but the result is not entirely in one's own hands. This is part of this is the problem of being a samsaric being. One is under the control of contaminated karma. And then when one experiences such hardship of not getting what one wants, one experiences the problems as mentioned above, relating to one's mind, one's speech, one's body, and so forth.
That in Yang Tsongkhapa, Chebo, Chebo Matumba, so des da gang le rewa di bene zaja manye ba yi chi bi dong lo se dang zu ga xie yi da kyapsan ra ye dan da so so cong na so ji go de ina cong ji du cong de yi lam ma gyo ji so su yu da na cong kyapsan di ma ra wa de ne yung go ga xie ka bre kyapsan ra wa ne nyu yu ma da ma ra wa ne ne yung go res je san de ne so su gi di ra ya gi比最然一个开上的这部的东东业界，这两个的都结果的，的呢，的那个马拉的，什么两个啊这东啊，我他这什么他的那用过了的，我当然开上拉马上也就马上，那用马到拉马上是被的那什么一切被的那什么两个啊用过了些。
The second illustration given is doing business but not accruing a profit. So this is the same in that one can either work really hard in one's career, but things don't go as in the way your career doesn't go in the direction you'd like, or you make an investment, you do a lot of research, you do everything right, perhaps you'll be successful, perhaps you will not. This is the situation for in samsara because of causes being contaminated. And then the result is one suffers in the 5 ways mentioned above. Sorrow rises in your mind, lamentation in your speech, and so forth.
데네기 토나 강아다 소중고래 다지간도 제모제한시네 제모라지 소소기 토베에 돈다리 베제 깔레 쇼게 제제 안돈다라 마토가 쇼르제 소소기다 디보디 라고 데네기 강아 셈체 마기와 무와다 데네 강아제 디송한지 차상기 통통 버려봐다 난시야 쉔게루치네 소소기 가로 제제 소소디와 나신 가로 말아야 둥가 데네기 데네기 두신 삼다 데 강아 망고시 디스 차상은 저기
These 2 very clear illustrations were given, and of those you almost certainly will have experience, but you'll have other experiences in your own life. Perhaps you work really hard, but you don't get a promotion that you feel that really should be yours, or you don't get the salary increase that you feel is appropriate. Or for where it's also very clear is sports people who put a lot of energy into their training and tremendous amount of commitment. Doesn't mean they necessarily are going to win a competition or stand on a podium. So all too often in life, we have hopes and dreams, and we apply ourselves, we do all that we should, but the result is all too often not attained. And of course, this happens in interpersonal relationships, romantic relationships, friendships that don't go the way one hoped. One has interest in someone, but that interest isn't reciprocated and so forth. So there's all too much experience of this in our lives.
대소 안저기 차상 모습도 통고를 하고 그래. 진짜 대소 시험을 했으면 동안 하고 구글에 선택해 삼로 중국으로 왔다 가서 나딩 안저 연구를 통과할 때 안저 가르침 거라서네 소수기 변에 지금 내가 질레죠. 또도 신의 대부디하고 영향했던 내가 제제 되네 내가 레제 대부디 만민도 안저 다제 가르선 제부하고 마셔야 돼. 차바디 마잡제 디 게레선 차바들로 코네. 되네 아직 차바 체 숙체라지 디 주마사야 돼. 귀인디 차바들 남실 파 귀인당 용마도 안 저기 귀인 바다 하고 말아. 나 되네게 소소게 총으로지 개발하지 총으로지 캡사 말해도 미신다디 지지 야고 주마서 니 주마서 현달의 균지체마도 디 юм세대 가서 하고 말아. 제가 디 교회 여바등에서 하고 거래. 다 교회인데 가는 수용 거래. 세야디래다. 가는 수용 거래서는 나도 레다 녀모 왕기 깨와 렘비기 깨와 코와를 깨와 렘바 인상 딘델을 딘에 교회인데 수용 거래. 레다 녀모 왕기 깨와 렘시비고 딘 풍보디 매바 있나? 대수 교회인데 영화요 말해서 제가 풍보디 레다 몰람난 깨와를 주디기 풍보시 있나? 안 딘디 교회인데 영화요 말해서 연구 말해서 제가 소수기 디 용거래. 제가 디 교양에 디 가르치네서는 막 가르치는 용거에서 나도 레다 녀모 풍부 깨와 레니 풍부 된 될라는 레기요래서 don다다 나는 주기 디 교인데 경아도 통주기 디 교인데 가르치는 용거래 집에 삼당에도 제사다 레다 녀모 깨와 렘바 풍부 될라는 용거래서 제사다 가르치 용원자다 가르 야고문은 레다 녀모 깨와 렘바디 깨와데 야고 민두 세다 하고 거다 디 하고 되다 레다 녀모 깨와 딜레데 탈고부도 선배 삼로시리 거래 딜레야게 된다라 디 안정고서 하고에 디 마시 송 데네 송네 다디수 가르 용거래 세도 레다 녀모 깨와 렘바 인자 딘델레 딘 용거래 딘디 여반자 델레 딘 용거래 데네 인자 레다 녀모 깨와 렘비 깨와 공부 깨와 렘체제라 데네 강아데스 용야래 용거래 제산 된다라 레다 녀모 깨와 렘비 풍보디 야고 민두스디 민두스 제사다 영면서 유야고 매 녀모가 야고 민두스 제사다 유녀모바디 매와서 고도세 녀모 빵야게 네 녀모 땡고야 된야게데 안디기 하고야 된다라 된다 녀보디 레다 녀모가 깨와 렘바 델레 딘데 용고 레다 녀모 깨와 렘바 델라 데네 요래세 다 레다 녀모 깨와 렘베 기 풍보디 깨와디 녀보 요 말에 세디 된다 디송고래
So to take the illustrations given in the text, if the farmer's crop fails, the farmer is likely to blame the weather, and they may well have good reason to blame the weather because, for example, there are floods or there was drought, or they may blame the seeds as being like a poor quality, and there may be validity in what the farmer is pointing to, certainly pointing at flooded fields. That's a good reason. But what the farmer will not be aware of is the problem really comes down to the karma that has been accumulated and now has ripened. Likewise, in terms of success in one's career, whether it's one's business flourishing or not, or getting the promotion that one wants or not, or the pay rise that one deserves or not getting it. When things there don't go the way we want, despite working for it, working hard for it, we are more likely to blame our boss or a colleague or the customers, as opposed to recognizing the underlying cause is karma. So this is what we need to recognize, that all that's referred to here are karmic results. And those causes have a flaw in them. Those causes are contaminated. They were accumulated under the influence of the afflictions. Therefore, contaminated karma needs to be abandoned, which means abandoning the afflictions. Then one comes to achieve rebirth under the influence of pure karma or uncontaminated karma and prayer. Then one's aggregates are uncontaminated. Then our situation is radically different from now. Right now, we are under the control of our karma and our afflictions. So here, this meditation comes to the conclusion to recognize what the actual fault is, the underlying undercurrents of what is wrong, and that is the karmic causes are contaminated. Therefore, what contaminates the karma, the afflictions, this is what has to be abandoned.
Any shigiri said, Dia Hawore, and the Dubadan Jaros, Jaggy said, Dia Hawore, Midubadan Tevi Dumas and the young and the new Dianza Hawore, that the Debata say, Yamini Dumas and the young and the Hawore, and the Yungor, and the Monson Hawore. She's not did and sit Malon and did something, or did it some of the diggy. Yina Dahanzu Karahago Marson, Diso Karachin Yungore said something you but don't water. This is Karajin Yungore, Kawan, Canis Yungore, this is Yumba, how go answer, 대소 가능시 가능했더니 가능시 연구를 해서 세상에서 풍보디 깨와대 여봐서 깨와대를 때는 연구도 와서 깨와대 가르스 레다 녀모의 깨와练习봐 시제 세상 레다 녀모 원기 깨와 练习 받으라 가위동아 나위동아 치위동아 안지 되어 되기 동아디게 사사 연구를 해서 다 레다 녀모 깨와래만 마임바 야 다신 대화진기 안에 가사당 안에 다신의 가사디길래 기회동아 가위동아 치위동아 그래서 연구를 해서 그래서 연구가 말이야. 되베트세는 그래서 가르치는 연구가 말해서 콘소기와렘 바디 레다 녀모의 기와렘 말했어. 제사다 개발 디레샤스. 안수디 안수를 뜻강아 된데 영화데 가르치는 안수 레다 녀모의 기와디 다 레다 녀모의 기와렘 바디레샤스. 대라드는 연구도 와. 진짜 레다 녀모의 기와렘 바디다 지금도 대래 레다 녀모의 기와렘 바디라 타고도 선배 삼로디 기고와. 제사다 안수도 로데디 하고 해도 니바 삼는 니바 따야디 디 가르를 때 연구를 해서 삼다고 그래. 이 삼다이디 레다 녀모께와 델레트는 연구도 와스. 자, 어두신 디 하고 그래. 제가 레다 녀모께와 델레트는 하고 있는데 레다 녀모 왕께와 레바들 꾼디네디네도 다디 꾼디네 꾼자야도 선배 삼다이도 어디데 야구민도 선배 삼리고다. 야구민도 선배 삼다도 다디 되고 맞들래 탈고도 선배 탈고도 델레 야가시라고 선배 삼던 거. 델레 탈고 선배 탈바 등에서 삼 계산다. 탈바 등에 기고. 제산다 탈바 등에 삼게 된다라 니 하고 와디. 진짜 된다 니바디디 먼저 동아디 마시에도 된다 니바 된다 니바 삼다야디 디 가를 때는 용고래서 삼다야디. 진짜 삼다야디 레다 녀모의 기와 델레 때는 용고도 와 선배 하고 네 하고 레다 녀모의 기와 렘바디 야본 민도 선배 하고 두고 진짜 니 하고도 동안 시에바자 세상이 송바디 동아디 다 뒤지기 동안 시에다 하고 그래. 지난 파과 이내면은 파과에는 소소 기분에 대화전에 기회 가서 술래야 대선 위험하다. 나와다 치우 가서 가와다. 되네.
I want to emphasize a point that I made a few times last weekend because it is crucial. I'm sure many of you have read this text before, and by reading about the sufferings of birth, of aging, of sickness, the suffering of death, the suffering of meeting with the unpleasant, the suffering of separation from the pleasant, and the suffering of seeking what you want and not getting it, what we've just looked at here. You can read it and you can understand it, and with every single one of the sufferings, you can nod along and say, yes, I get this, it's clear. And you can also think to yourself, the Buddha said that true sufferings should be known, and I know this, I can understand this, it is not beyond me. And then we think it's done. But that is not what the Buddha meant by coming to know suffering. We have to go deeper than this. So throughout the text, how it is presented is in a way that should be clear and easy to understand. But through receiving teachings and our own reflections, we need to go to a far deeper level. Where we should take this knowledge in each of our meditations is this. Now, this is applying to all of these the sufferings, so the 7 we've looked at, is that they come, whichever one you're meditating on, it comes from causes. And those causes, those karmic causes, are not pure. They are contaminated. What does contaminated mean here? It means that they were created under the influence of the afflictions. And in particular, it's referring to us ourselves as having contaminated aggregates. Our aggregates were taken under the control, or our rebirth was dictated by contaminated karma. This is why we are subject to the suffering of birth, the suffering of aging, the suffering of sickness, the suffering of death, the suffering of meeting with the pleasant, separation from the pleasant, meeting with the unpleasant, separation with the pleasant, and not getting what one desires. It's because we have these aggregates that we experience all of these sufferings. Because we have these contaminated aggregates, we suffer. Those beings who are born in the Pure Land of Sukhavati, they they do not suffer in this way. They do not suffer in this way. So this is what we need to come to. Then we know where to point the finger of blame. And the purpose of pointing the finger of blame means we know what we need to change. So if we look at the illustrations given in this point, we're not talking about, the weather's at fault, or my awful boss. The problem is I have aggregates, I've contaminated aggregates taken under the influence of contaminated karma. That is the problem. This is what I need to eradicate. And this gets us to understanding the suffering, all-pervasive suffering of conditionality. So of the threefold division of suffering, this is the third one, all-pervasive suffering of conditionality, the underlying cause of what is wrong. And this is where we need to get to. So in all your meditations, this is the outcome, to come to understand suffering at that level. And that point I've just made then, it brings us now to the eighth suffering. In brief, the 5 appropriated aggregates are suffering. In brief, the 5 appropriated aggregates are suffering. So what are the individual aggregates? So the 5 are form, feeling. The third is, I translate as differentiation, is often translated as discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. So form, feeling, differentiation, compositional factors, and consciousness.
다고 레세데 다고 녀왈리 풍보세데 다 김제로 자시로 딘리도.
So, term aggregates then, I've mentioned what the 5 are: form, feeling, differentiation, compositional factors, and consciousness. So let's talk about this word appropriated. So appropriated has 2 meanings, one from the perspective of cause and one from the perspective of result. So appropriated from the perspective of cause means that these, just first to say, the word that's translated correctly as appropriated literally means closely taken. So from the perspective of cause is to take or obtain something through attachment. So these aggregates were taken or obtained because of attachment, the affliction attachment. So the cause that led to this rebirth, that cause was accumulated with the presence of attachment. So attachment, so the appropriated there literally has this meaning of to take or to take something or obtain something. And so that's from the causal perspective. The resultant perspective is that these appropriated aggregates, so let's actually repeat this firstly, from the causal perspective. So these appropriated aggregates from the causal perspective means that they were caused, the cause was infused with attachment, and thereby one gained appropriated aggregates. The resultant perspective is that with these appropriated aggregates, we continue to accumulate contaminated causes that will lead to further appropriated aggregates, so further results in lives to come. So from the resultant perspective then would be results to come. The causal perspective refers to the cause of what we have now. So let me repeat this in case I'm not saying it so clearly. So from the appropriated, from the causal perspective, is the cause of the aggregates we have now is that the karma is contaminated by attachment. And from the appropriated aggregates, from the resultant perspective, with these appropriated aggregates, one continues to accumulate contaminated karma that will result in lives to come, in perpetuating the cycle of rebirth.
Dinal by Yawa Cheva in a leda Numo Rami be Kiwi Pumbo de la Carriers, Suk Pumbo Yongre, Soy Pumbo Yore, Dushi Pumbo Yore, Dushi Pumbo Yore, number ship Pumbo Yore, SS, that didn't Pumbanga said in Shigur. Just a leda Numo Rawan, leda Numo only Kiwi Suki Pumbo Yores, leda Numo be Kiwi, Soy Pumbo Yores, leda Numo won't give you Dushi Pumbo Yore, Dushi, number ship Pumbo Yores, or that. Ding about the letter.
So these 5 appropriated aggregates, each one of them were taken or obtained under the control of contaminated karma and afflictions. So we had no free, so instead of saying under the control of, one could say without free will. Without free will, we ended up with this form aggregate, with this feeling aggregate, with this differentiation aggregate, the compositional factors consciousness. All of these were taken without, or obtained without our free will. They were taken under the control, or dominated by contaminated karma and afflictions.
Number shape, number sim, number shape. Numbership Pumbola same like Jazada, Jayu Simba Papa, Sangi, same numbership the ye, numbership Pumbore, de Sajineva Limbu Pumbo Mare, that is Marwa. That didn't, and around to that, now the social gibo core, but you numbership at the Lenjimiji, Sajineva Pumbo in Guri Besine, Guayo Marwa Pen. Also, social gibo. This is Sangi, you judge about Sangi, number Sheba de, number Pumbo de, Sajineva Limbigu, number Shipumbo Mare, Dirwa Malaysia. She's a number she Pumbo say Dilla, Sajin Yawali Pumbo number she was Yorima, the number she Pumbo Ina, Sajin Yawali Pumbo number she Pumbo Ingu Malaysia or that, and that Dirwa. Number she Pumbo, number she was Ina Sajin Yawali Pumbo number she Pumbo the Malaysia or that. She's a Malaysia Sangi that Dutch but that Dima don't what Dima together.
Take of the five aggregates, look at the aggregate of consciousness, so the fifth of the five. So for Arya Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, they have a consciousness aggregate, but it's not contaminated. As ordinary beings, we have a consciousness aggregate, but it is contaminated.
Number numbership pumbo ina saje nyawalin bi numbership pumbo in gu ribes gu re gu mares tiwa ta ba ina tiang gu mares la gyure da ta ngaro jine so so kibo ko ba ine simju je chesam je jeba je ta dongba ni do ba mi da ba da dongba ni do bi sherap yong ro wa do bi numbership yong ro wa jisan sem yong ro wa dong ni do bi sem da mi da ba do bi sem yong ro wa disu dong ni do bi sem di numbership ba re numbership pumbo re Mayanzo, Kowa began to give numbers pumpo de such a Nyawalin pumpo numbers pumpo de mares. Chesanko later, Numo Umijua Marella or that, don't you to be shared up there. Don't you to be same to your water.
So again, consciousness aggregate of Arya Bodhisattvas and Buddhas is uncontaminated. For us ordinary beings, the consciousness aggregate is contaminated and appropriated. Yeah. Right, let me just...
But the chipi that is Sajin Yawali Pumponga Lason, Sajin Yawali number ship Pumbo Lason, Cesatan around the number Sheba ina, Sajin Yawali number ship in Guribes and Guayo Mares, President Jeba Toma Yutopi, Don Yutopi, Sem Jorva. That number she pumbo rebes in the res in a such a newa limbi number she pumbo de mares.
So our consciousness aggregate is a contaminated, appropriated aggregate. But is it pervaded that for ordinary beings, every consciousness is necessarily an illustration of a contaminated, appropriated consciousness aggregate? And there the answer is no. For the wisdom realizing emptiness in the continuum of an ordinary being, that consciousness is an aggregate. The consciousness, it's an illustration of the consciousness aggregate, but it is not an contaminated, appropriated aggregate. So in brief, for an ordinary being, the consciousness aggregate is not pervaded by being a contaminated, appropriated aggregate. There is the exception of the wisdom realizing emptiness.
Dushiki Pumbo said the Hakoe de Kalakasho, Sanyu Jumne, Dunga Shepacha said the Dinis to the Hakoe de Sigure. Chesada, Dushi Pumbo said the Leda, Numo, on a Rame by Kiki Pumbo de Lada, Dushi Pumbo like what is. Deneza, Delatine, the Ship Ganshe, Kiki Chasantus Yongore, said it. Gale. Leda Numo on a Kiwalim Pumbo de la Dushi Pumbo like what is. Chesna Leda Numo Pumbo de la Tene. And the Deva Midibi Dunga, and the Chicken Davi Dunga, Gaivi Dua, Chivi Dunga, and the Midubada, and Midubada, David Dunga, Dubada, and the David Dunga, Midubada, David Dunga, Devats and Mani Dunga, the Ganga Dunga, the Chasa, the Culture, the Latin Waters, Dunga Yabada, Leda, Numo, and Pumbo Diobaza, give it Dunga, Yonga, Gavi Dunga, and Navi to achieve this. Chasa Yungore, the Leda Numo, give the Mavana, did Tangbo Dunga Dundike, Yoa Males. Chesana Donda Inbody, Leda Numo and Kiawa Lemba de Dunga did that. Dushi Dunga said, Delatine, Dunga Shanda to get Chasa Yungore, said. Reda dunda dide dunga mangbo she dunda dor duna sempa sik dor dun she nanda dunda ningbo di dire se orda oma di deletine yungora se de.
So in this eighth suffering, I've spoken about the word first appropriated, then first aggregates, then appropriated, and now the term in brief. What in brief means is that the very reason that we experience the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, as well as that of meeting with the unpleasant, separation from the pleasant, and not getting what we desire, is because, in brief, because we have these contaminated, appropriated aggregates. So this is, in brief, the reason why we suffer. This being recognized, truly recognized, means we know what needs to be abandoned. This is why this eighth point is so important, and that then is the meaning of in brief. Because of having these contaminated, appropriated aggregates, we experience all forms of suffering.
And Jubala Tempi Dunga Yune, and Dunga Yune, Dunga Yune, Duji Dunga Ranshin to Yuba de Dedala Yaya Sambahos.
So now returning to the text, and here this first paragraph is a summary presentation. And I've just made one change in the translation to my normal terminology. Contemplating the meaning of the statements in brief, the five appropriated aggregates of suffering has 5 points. Now, the first, they are a vessel of suffering yet to come. The second, they are a vessel of the suffering already arisen. And the third, they are a vessel for the suffering, or the suffering of transient, the suffering of physical, mental pain. And then the fourth, they are a vessel for the suffering of transient happiness. And fifth, they are in the nature of the suffering of conditioning. Think about these points again. Read that. Think about these points again and again.
Lama la dine jewa chima panchi dunga nam jemba os dambo di danda ro shidire da ngombo drive dunga yuni asadi imbi gimsendi di shigor da di an saba da chesa nyewa lembe phumbo di lama la dine jewa chima panchi dunga nam jemba os.
So the first paragraph there is the summary presentation, and now in the next paragraph, the larger one, is the extensive presentation. So here, those 5 points above, those 5 summary points, or the 5 points explaining why one suffers with these appropriated aggregates, are now explained more extensively. So the first point is that the sufferings of the next rebirth onward are induced in dependence upon the appropriation of the aggregates.
제산디기 제시에 마게바 시에는 디소르 녀와림베 풍보디 랑바라 띠네 제사다 레다 녀모 풍보디 랑바 인장 띠엔델라 랑 띠엔델야다 녀모바게 녀모바게 왜 레사 레디 왕게 제와 치마게 네 제와 치마 파제 동아 녀야기 네 레 제보 녀야기 규사고레스 단다라 ngomba dribi dunga ngomba dribi dunga ne che ba si di de da nyumo ngwe tin de la ke wa chime nam so ya dunga nyoye gi phumbo de nyoye gi de sa go res di tin de la sa go res go 자 nyewa le phumbo lang ba la tin ne si da nyewa le phumbo lang ba yin zang nga zo tin de la da nga zo nyomo ji go de de sha kon ro nyomo ji di wong ge le sa yin de 이게 대부 모험반에 깨와 치마네 치마 되게 동안 요약이 아니 잼바지고 그래서 깨바지고 그래서 네 세디로 하다 가지다 나가 지걸 수다 셈다 가지래 donala 대시 예와 천안가샤로 하다 예와 마치반은 레다 녀몽을 지고 풍부하다 그러다 대다 레다 녀몽 풍부 그런 예와 심마시바지 레다 녀몽 풍부 뒤 가르치고 그래라나 예와 치마 동아 영화에 대한 띵텔레티는 용거래서 가르쳐 그래 띵들이 주사고 그래서 가서 녀몽밖에 녀몽을 레사고 봐서 제자디 예와 치마게 동아 영화에 동아디게 파게 봐지비 띵지고 그래서 되다 레다 녀몽 풍부 그러래 예와 레레레는 마치바지 풍부 그런 지장바디만 손이 시거래
So reading both the summary presentation and extensive presentation together. So the summary presentation, they are a vessel of suffering. So they are a vessel. So this word vessel, we should understand, because normally we think of it can be translated as container. So what it refers to, they are a vessel. These 5 aggregates are a vessel of suffering yet to come. So the 5 aggregates are a vessel of suffering yet to come. And so just as a translator, I say that clearly so we understand it's not just like the body, but it's referring to the body and the mind. Now the extensive explanation. Here, the first point is that the sufferings of the next rebirth onward are induced in dependence upon the appropriation of the aggregates. So in other words, by merely taking these 5 aggregates in this life, or taking is not so good, they're given by one's karma, we ensure that we will continue to suffer in lives to come. So because we have these contaminated aggregates, we will continue to accumulate causes that will lead to us remaining bound in cyclic existence. The very presence of having these aggregates means that we will create the causes for our future suffering, our ongoing perpetuation of the cycling in cyclic existence.
ngānsu lé na nyōmo ngē kiawa lēmba yīnzāng ngānsu lé yāngyā nyōmo jīgō rō wāsi wā nyōmo jīgō rē tā lé na nyōmo kiawa mē lēmba chē kiawa bāshī lū tū ki kiawa lēngan jī lēmba yīndā tēsū kiawa tēne tuyashā kīng mā rē tuyashā khōn rō tēshī kīng mā rē sī wā rō wā tēsā tā ngānsu lé na nyōmo ngē rāngwā mē bā kiawa lēndō bā yīnzāng kiawa tī lēmba yīnzāng tē tēndē lē ngānsu lē tuyashā kīgirē khōn rō kīgirē ngā jē kīgirē anī tēsī dūshī shānā nāsam nēsam lōktā lō sōpa kīgirē 근데 녀모 끼어도 녀모 디견진에다 레양한다 사용을 레 사용도 레디 개와치마 냐와다 가서다 이다다 든돌아서 봐게네 근데 안동아 녀야기 동아 용비 동아디 봐 젬바세 동아 개발지고 그래서 동아디 수 라고를 받아 동아 쟁거를 끼고 개발지고 그래서 제사다 밀리 개발이나 되는 동아 개발지고 제사 디네에서다 안주 풍부 디기 원버 주비 동아 된 제상 가르라나 안주 풍부 레다 뉴모 개발렘바 인장 될때는 아주 뉴모 바기고 그래 되셔 컨트롤라서 바기 디 레사바데 제고 개발치마 동아냐에 동아디기 바개발지고 그래서 너나지시 왔다지 디 안주게 레다 뉴모와 주위기 풍부 디 괜해서
Because that we took rebirth under the power of contaminated karma and afflictions, under the control, without our free will, that we continue to have these afflictions, and thereby continue to accumulate further contaminated karma. We have no free will over whether we have attachment or anger or jealousy and so forth. These we have under the due to the karma we have created, or the perpetuation of these afflictions. It's not something that we have free will over. And this is because our aggregates are contaminated. Therefore, with these contaminated physical and mental aggregates, we continue to create further contaminated karma. And depending on what ripens at the time of death, again, it's something we don't have control over. It's not our free will that we can select which karmic imprint ripens at death. That will then determine whether our next rebirth is in the lower realms or we remain in the higher realms. But we remain bound in cyclic existence because of having these contaminated aggregates.
가와다 나와다 치와다 안되는 동안에 용거래스 디용아 제사다 만도 레다 녀모기 류디 랑메나 주메나 가와 용거 말에 안에 나와 용거 말에 치와디 용거 말에스 제사다 이 디용아디 가와다 나와다 디네기 치외 동안 용아디 가르세스네 레다 녀모기 풍보지 주바 인상 디수 용거래 제사다 가와다 나와다 치외기 동안 용사기 띠양 뇌디디 아주 차거래스.
The second one. So again, I'll read the two together, the summary and then the extensive explanation. The summary, the appropriated aggregates are a vessel of the suffering already arisen. So the explanation below. Second, the present aggregates become the basis of illness, aging, and so forth, which depend upon them. So illness, aging, and so forth refers to the other seven, so the above sufferings. So the very reason that we suffer from birth, from aging, and so forth, that we suffer from meeting with the unpleasant or separation from the pleasant, is because we have these contaminated, appropriated aggregates. This is the very reason we are bound in this suffering situation.
제자다디 동아이 다 유에 동아이 유에 지상가래라나 당한조 레다 녀모 웅이 깨와 렘바 인자 다 깨와 렘바사 안주디 안주게 풍보지 된래야 녀마게 동아녀야기 사번 바차다 사번 민지 차이야 유에들레스 제산디 여바산 디기 민녀도 젠지 체여도 세븐이 민지 안그 동아 동아녀야다 안 유에 동아녀야도 디용 거래서 제가 디네 인사 다양한 저게 동아니보 내가는 지수되와 내가는 세디 다대갑된 내가는 세디 가라 가와를 고그래서네 아주게 동아녀야게 유 사번들 고그래 사번디 띵아주 여바 인자 안에 대단 제네 될 때네다 제부 디소 동아다 유에 동아디 용거래서 되네 인사다 먼저 풍보디 다 되네게 동아다 유에 동아다 동아게 뇌 임백임 센티리에서 오다.
Again, reading from the summary and then the extensive explanation. So here the third and fourth are presented together. They are a vessel for the suffering of suffering. So our appropriated aggregates are a vessel for the suffering of physical and mental pain, and they are a vessel for the suffering of transient happiness. So the extensive explanation below. The aggregates give rise to both the third and fourth types of suffering due to their relationship with the negative habitual tendencies of each. So what we saw in the second point is that it's because we have these appropriated aggregates that we experience the other seven of the eightfold suffering. And now what we see here, it's because we have these appropriated aggregates that we experience those first two of the threefold division of suffering, the suffering of physical mental pain and the suffering of transient happiness. This is the reason we are in this predicament. This is the very reason that we suffer.
나 돈나라 디 인가지 대시 다 되네게 기회 동화 가위 동화 치유 동화 딩알 셰 동화 뒤인체 안디 다데 셰기 안에 시과소래 개와 치마 동화 기회 뇌체야 체델이야 안에 시게 동화기에 뇌체야 아니 예 가위 가서 유회 동화다 동화 유회 뇌체야 차상 뇌세대 딘디 술을 용거로서는 레다 녀모몽의 중에 풍부 될레티는 용거레스 세상다 계속교인 차상 레다 녀모 풍부 될레티는 용거레스 세도다 레다 녀모주 풍부되다 야고 민도 세야디디 수고하다 된다디래
What we have seen here thus far in this presentation is that the reason we will suffer in lives to come is because in this life we have these appropriated aggregates, and why is that the case that we'll suffer in future lives? Because the very causes for ongoing suffering are pervade our aggregates, and therefore we'll continue to create these causes. But having these appropriate aggregates isn't only the reason why we'll suffer in lives to come, it's why we suffer in this life. Whether we look at this, the sufferings as in the Eightfold Presentation or the Threefold Presentation. We experience those sufferings in this life because of having these appropriated aggregates. And these aggregates are appropriated because they have come about under the control of contaminated karma and afflictions. This is why we are suffering now from the Eightfold Division, the Threefold Division of suffering, and it's why we'll continue to suffer in lives to come.
ngaba nyeleni phumbo drupzam ni duji dungaji rashin de gede lenyen ngame shamon do gibe duji tamche duji dungali mechiros.
So then I'll read from both again. For the fifth type, they are in the nature of the suffering of conditioning. And then the extensive explanation. Fifth, by their mere existence, the appropriated, just to say, in this explanation, I've changed the translation a little. Fifth, by their mere existence, the appropriated aggregates arise in the nature of the suffering of conditioning, because all compounded phenomena are under the control of something other, namely previous karma and mental afflictions, are the suffering of conditioning. So the word I changed was from volitional formations to compounded phenomena. It's the same term, it can be translated in different ways, but this is more accurate here.
Andi chela geli sene duji kumbo chawa leves duji dunga se chawa leves dine mare se wada duji dunga se jorwa ndambo nganzo le danyu me kewa len de duji kumbo memba se de geli sene duji kumbo chawa leves ne mare se wada an duji kumbo se de duji dunga se de kan re lamna le dan lenye ngame shawan do jubi duji kasore lenyengi 풍보 drupsamgi dujiger dungali rashin des kides lenyengi 풍보 drupsamgi dujiger dungali rashin kides ngaba 제자다 가르세는 아주 두지 동화세디 게 살아지 당보가 또 게, 얘네 글리 전에 게 샹다 태지 두지 동화 차와레베스는 얘네 말해서 그래. 안 두지 동화 간데세에서는 깨왕아미기 레다 녀모 방지 파 깨와 줍잠기 깨와 잠기 다랑 안에 두지 동화시 교왕 오레스 다가레스. 제자다 두지 동화 람나 단다라 레다 녀모모 깨와 렘비 풍보텔라 두지 동화레스. 제가 디마도 달레다 녀모모 깨와레 되네 글리글레자 두지 동화세 차기를 배서 되네 말레스. 코 깨sam니네 두지고 두지 동화레스 오다. 단다라다 두지 동화 간데세데 레다 녀몽기 원기 끼디비기 풍보텔라 다 두지 동화레스 고고라.
So reading this about the fifth point in the extensive presentation. Fifth, by their mere existence, the appropriated aggregates arise in the nature of the suffering of conditioning. The meaning of this first clause here in the sentence is that from the moment one attains the new set of aggregates, so at the moment that rebirth is taken, from that point one is experiencing, or there is the suffering of conditioning. It's not that the suffering of conditioning is something that comes about, or it's not that one's aggregates become contaminated. This isn't the case. From the moment of one attaining these five aggregates, from the moment of birth, then one is in the very nature or subject to suffering. That's probably the best way to say it. One is in the nature of the suffering of conditioning, or subject to the suffering of conditioning. So this isn't something that comes later. It happens immediately.
And in Tangajilo Dondala, Dushi Dunga said the Kanishi Legacy, Lenyun, Nami, Shawan to Kubu, Dushi Della, and Dushi Tama, and Dushi Dunga like this. Leda Nyumo, Leda, Lenyun Namigi, Rawan, Shawan to Kubu, Dushi, Sukinada, Sheba Inada, Kanambra Sheban Toa, Dusha Karine, Dushi Kanishine, Leda Nyumo Namigi, Leda Nyumo, Shawan to Kubu. The
sentence continues, and again, just with the corrected translation. Because all compounded phenomena are under the control of something other, namely previous karma and mental afflictions, are the suffering of conditioning. So first, just to say as an aside, so the translation volitional formations is normally in the 12 links. It's a link of karma or volitional karma. It's the same Tibetan word, just with the word karma attached. So that's what the translator used here, but it should rather be compounded phenomena, which is the normal way of translating it. And it's the same term as in the suffering of conditioning. So the word conditioning or compounded. What it means is that any impermanent, a synonym would be an impermanent phenomenon or something, a functioning thing. With the meaning in clearer English, now I'll return to what Geshe is saying. So because all compounded phenomena, where compounded phenomena means everything impermanent, such as anything from matter, so anything form, anything from matter, or any consciousness, so matter or consciousness, or non-associated compositional factors too. All of these are under the control of something other, and therefore are the suffering of conditioning. There are illustrations of the suffering of conditioning. So every compounded phenomenon, so whether it's form or matter, or whether it's consciousness, this is an illustration of the suffering of conditioning. Why? Because it's under the control of something other, namely previous karma and mental afflictions.
Leda nyomo ngamigi shawandu jubi dushi tiki dushi dunga reyes donda delanga da dushi dunga yingo am donda khares dushi che kharela leda nyomo shawandu jubi dushi dela dushi dunga lagi reyes shahore.
This is quite a pivotal, crucial sentence, important sentence. And the further point to take from it is that we have a suffering of conditioning, or its longer title be all-pervasive suffering of conditioning. What is its meaning? And we could take this meaning as what came before, under whatever is under the control of something other, namely previous karma and mental afflictions. That is an illustration of the suffering of conditioning.
And in that, Leda Nyomong, Jua, Mayimbig, Shawa the Magu to Jet together, Leda Nyomong, Nami, Leda Nyomong, Shawa the Maguna, and then Denigi to Jet, Shawa the Magu to Jet again, to Shiki to one Maria.
anything that, so then the opposite, anything that has not come about under the control of previous karma and the mental afflictions will not be an illustration of the suffering of conditioning. So I'll say it again. Any phenomenon that is not under the control of previous karma and mental afflictions is not an illustration of the suffering of conditioning.
That is ngay me le da nyomo be xiangwang du yuba de marwa de duji rawa jesa dinza diso duji gi tunga mare se wada kase le da ngay me le da nyomo be xiangwang du yuba de mare da di gewe sam do gom do ki ge barwa dinza ko le da nyomo be xiangwang du yuba de gom ge won ko rawa me ba cha wa jesa di men be che da jang zo gyamro ge ya jiangxue sem ge ya ning je ge ya jamba ge ya 내 동반이 또 비셔럽게 이게 차상 다 뒤지러 와다 뒤지래 안에 뒤지 누가 레베스네 뒤지 누가 말해 멤비 김제 가래라나 레다 녀모 비게 샹왕 주바데 말해 고시 레다 녀모 비 샹왕 주바 말해 현재다 뒤지 누가 말해 사실 일단 뒤지 차상 뒤지 누가 인고야요 말해 나중에도 어디가서 미파바 점르기야 다 미다바 곰 미다바 또비 섬자 잠바기야 니지기야 람라마 슈비가서 소소기고 코와발을 열어봐 이제 돈이 또비 셔럽 또 줄려기야 돼서 르디게 찾아 뒤지래 근데 뒤지기 누가래서 뒤지 누가 말해 많이 비김자 가래서는 나메레다 녀모베 샹원 뒤기 말해
So staying with this, because, and I'll just read it again and give again this explanation. Because all compounded phenomena are under the control of something other, namely previous karma and mental afflictions, are the suffering of conditioning. So included within, so compounded phenomena, as mentioned, it's everything from form or matter, as well as consciousness. But now to look more deeply, not every illustration of consciousness in an ordinary being is necessarily a suffering of conditioning, an illustration of suffering of conditioning, despite being a compounded phenomenon. So there are consciousnesses which are compounded phenomenon, but are not suffering of conditioning, and this is in the continuum of ordinary beings. So this would be virtuous minds such as refuge, the wisdom realizing emptiness, love, compassion, bodhicitta. So these virtuous minds they are compounded phenomena, but because they are not under the control of previous karma and mental afflictions, they are not suffering of conditioning.
다든다 닝보 딜랑한테 가라하고 야레스네 당하도 레다 녀모 옹이 중 풍보디다 동아이 뒤시기 동아세 디레스 다 레다 녀모 옹이 풍보디 왜 친지라 나 강아 디강을 해야 되게 강아 디게 차상세다 디 용고레스 디 강아 차서 용한 디게 차상 귀니 그래서 레다 녀모 옹이 풍보디레스 풍보딜레tin 용고레스 제가 레다 녀모 풍보 코로나 귀인데 요 가르치레스네 그 유고로 녀모 버려 왔어 nyomo wale tin ke wa za nyomo bi de wo de la ga ga ji ma de ya wo sha me de wa se na de ne re se ta don da yin bo de la nga za ha go wa de de ji mong bu shi ne de su bu du sam da ga ga de 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 yong do wa sa sam me ta sam da de sam da de ga ga de ga ni yong go re se ne phung bo de le de yong do wa phung bo de le de ga ji yong go re se phung bo ko ro da 뒤지 동아 세대 가서 레다 녀몽의 샤왕 뒤도 바지레스 대자 용거레스 제자다 레다 녀몽의 샤왕도 뒤보다 강하다는 용거는 다 레다 녀몽의 게 샤왕 뒤 풍부되다 야고 민도 다 될래다 타고도 지도다 레다 녀몽백이 개월에 풍부디 용하여 유 녀몽바들 녀버된데 녀몽다 빵제 빵비 탈바 토고도 새벽에다 탈바 되게 지금 거래 전다들이 당한도 두시는 삼다네 당한 저기 또난 인보디다 내다 녀모주 코와 인보 민도 디 매비 김자 가라선 디 규디 녀모 받으래셔 쳐서 녀모 받 빵고도 해야 돼. 다 되네게 빵비 빵바 탈바던 얘기 삼로도 기고가 돼. 김자로 지이래다 디 하고 고가 차고래.
Just to then briefly summarize what you've looked at tonight is that these appropriated physical and mental aggregates have come about under the control of contaminated karma and afflictions. And this is why we suffer. It's why we suffer in this life through any of these previous 7 illustrations of suffering. Or if we look at the threefold division, the suffering of physical and mental pain and the suffering of transient happiness, all of these illustrations of suffering we experience because we have these appropriated aggregates, and they are appropriated because the karma that led to their appropriation, the appropriation of these aggregates, is contaminated by the very presence and role of the afflictions. This means that the cause of every single suffering experience we ever have had or will have is our afflictions. And this is what we need to come to recognize, so as to give rise to a determined attitude. I need to abandon my afflictions. Whenever something's wrong, I know where to point the finger of blame, and I need to make sure I gain freedom from the afflictions, and in this way bring about an end to my suffering.
베베기 된주자 아니 다람사기 변주기 견세 다데 기실하도라 페이지 아니디 여름치기 세부친래다 디니기 한 잠니지 거 도스제네 기실하도 호주기도 대송야래샤 지상한도 계승님만에 먼저야 직 폐기 제대로 연구를 했어야 된 세부 제대로 되는 수저직 세부라지 하고 마소하지는 아주 럽센 디바래 지난디네 인자다 산이 아주 계실 하도니 마저음치 송교를 아니 거라 엔지토네 시교래 지대 지게 판도하고 연구를 했습니다. 있습니다. 이장은 산이 쇼에 내가 저 럽센데 잠자제 아니 양강수야 최근에 배워있나 아니 야고서를 선무도 아니 지금 연구 접로를 향해서 못해시 안 럽센이 조샤나 야고 지사를 선무도
Just finally to say, as many of you probably know, there's a big event at the stupa tomorrow, and amongst the invited guests in the morning, Geshe Thubten from the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, he is giving a talk, and so he's an excellent Geshe. He was a translator for His Holiness for many years. And he's going to be talking on compassion, and the event is in honor of the Year of Compassion, which is in honor of His Holiness's 90th birthday. So I think tomorrow morning we'll cancel our class, and in this way, those who want to go, I'd encourage you to go. I think it will be an excellent opportunity to hear him talk. So if those who want to go, then at least you can have the opportunity. And in the afternoon, we'll have our class as usual at 2:30.
No,
is it okay if we have our class tomorrow afternoon? Because I think there are still things happening there, but Geshe Thubten was only in the morning. So is it okay if we have our class in the afternoon?
yeah.
Thank you then.